On the ninth night of praying and lighting candles, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. The footsteps sounded slow, heavy, and laboured. The hairs were standing up on the back of my neck as the kitchen door started slowly creaking open on its own. Watch until the end of the video to find out what dark secrets this person uncovered in the kitchen of their new home. I'd like to make a quick disclaimer. Some of today's stories deal with sensitive subjects such as suicide, so viewer discretion is advised. With that said, let's get on with the stories. I'm your host, Severed Soul. This all began a few days ago when a good friend of mine, Scott, moved into his new apartment. He asked for some help moving in during the weekend, and I figured it'd probably only take about an hour, so I offered to help. As me and Scott were moving his things into his apartment, we could both sense that something just didn't quite feel right. It really felt like we were being watched. The apartment complex itself is quite old, so we thought nothing of it. We thought maybe it was just the feeling of moving into a new place, and we continued moving his stuff in. It only took about an hour to move everything in, and then Scott asked me if I wanted to stay and watch a movie. It was very late, and we both ended up falling asleep. We were awoken to one of the worst smells by far I've ever encountered. Both myself and Scott are hunters, and we both knew immediately what that smell was. It was the smell of rotting flesh. It smelled so terrible, the whole house absolutely reeked of it. And then, within seconds, just like that, it smelt normal again. We were both really freaked out. The next day, Scott was determined to find out where that smell was coming from. Scott told his landlord he thought an animal had crawled into the ventilation and died. But when the landlord sent somebody to check the ventilation out, the man found nothing. I called Scott later while I was at work and asked him if he'd had any more experiences like the previous night. He said he kept hearing knocking sounds in the walls, and items around the house kept being misplaced. He asked me if I'd come back over that night. It was late when I got to his house, and again I got that really uneasy feeling as I walked through the door. I want to point out that both myself and Scott are Christian. We don't profess to any specific denomination, but we attend a small non-denominational church every Sunday and have strong faith in Jesus Christ. The house still felt off, but smelled normal again. We agreed that maybe we just overreacted the other night. It was late, and we were both very tired. That is when we heard it. Slow and heavy footsteps walking down the hallway, with the sounds of chains rattling behind, followed very shortly after, again, by that rancid smell of rotting flesh. Scott stepped forward and said, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command any and all evil to leave this place." Almost immediately, the house fell silent. The smell was gone, and everything just felt normal again. That was a couple of days ago now, and Scott hasn't had any experiences since that night. Hopefully, whoever, or whatever, was in that apartment is now gone for good. Scott has done a little bit of research since what happened. Many years ago, there was an old woman that lived in that complex, just a few doors down from Scott's apartment. Apparently, the old woman took her own life. We have no idea if this has anything to do with what me and Scott encountered, or if it was just a mere coincidence. Whatever the case, neither myself or Scott will ever forget it. This is my first Reddit post, so please bear with me. I'm visiting my grandparents and staying over for a couple of nights, as my grandfather is having some heart trouble. I wanted to make a point to see them again, and take my father with me, because they're his parents and they aren't getting any younger. I was sleeping alone, in the bedroom that is typically occupied by my grandfather. I woke up and checked my phone to see that it was about 12:30 in the morning. I had only been asleep for a few hours, and really hoped that I could get a few more hours sleep. I had to drive home today, and it's a long drive, so I really needed to be able to focus. I turned over and placed my head back down on my pillow. Just as I was about to drop back off to sleep, I experienced a sharp tug on my pillow. The pillow didn't move far, but it definitely shifted from under me. I turned towards the side of the bed and saw the outline of a man standing next to me. Initially, I presumed that it was either my father or my grandfather, as it looked a bit like them. He did seem to be a little bit taller than both my father and grandfather, but it was difficult to say. I wear strong prescription glasses, and it was dark, so I couldn't make out any distinct facial features. However, my father and grandfather are both quite slim, yet this man seemed fairly overweight. Startled, I said, "Jesus Christ," expecting some kind of response, but was met with silence. So then I asked, "What's going on?" But still, there was nothing. Then I reached out to touch him, and when I did, every hair on my body stood on end, and a shiver ran down my spine. My hand went ice cold as it passed straight through the man, and he faded away within a matter of seconds. The presence definitely felt slightly ominous. I woke my father up in his room to make sure he was okay and explain everything to him. I checked in on my grandfather, who was still fast asleep at the time, and he said that he was okay. If it really was a spirit, and I didn't imagine it at all, why would it make the effort to tug my pillow and wake me up, and then say nothing at all? I don't know of any hauntings that have occurred in this house, and my grandparents have lived there for over 40 years. Have you encountered anything like this before? I bought my first house in 2003, and I was absolutely over the moon. Shortly after moving in, I was outside having a conversation with two of my neighbours. They were telling me about the history of my house and joking with me about the ghost in my kitchen. Well, I presumed that they were joking, so I just played along, pretending that I'd already experienced some strange activity since moving in. That summer, as time went on, I met more and more of the local residents, and they all seemed to share similar stories about my house. Now, I was becoming slightly concerned that my house may actually be concealing some kind of dark secret. Finally, I was having a conversation with one of the elderly residents, a religious woman named Mary. She was well respected around the area and seemed very approachable, so I thought I'd ask her if there was any truth to the rumours. I knew she was very unlikely to screw with my head, which is why I asked her in the first place. It turned out that the previous owner purchased the house, then decided very soon after that they wouldn't be moving in. When asked why they had decided not to live in that house, they said it was because they were too scared to be in there at night. They said there were disembodied sounds in the night of footsteps, whispering and sobbing, and it all seemed to be coming from the kitchen. They also reported seeing glimpses of a man sitting in the kitchen, covered in blood. One of my neighbours had assisted with the renovation of the house while the previous owners were preparing to move in. He said that he was putting up some tiles in the kitchen when he felt something lift up his dreadlocks. Though I have had paranormal experiences in the past, it was many years ago, and now I just put it down to night terrors. One day, I went to a small local video store to rent a movie. I had to fill out a form with my personal and credit info, including my name, date of birth, and of course, my address. The store worker looked down at the form with a concerned look on her face. "Oh geez, you live in that house," she said. I asked her what she meant, and she told me that her former employer had committed suicide in my house. She said she came to my house as soon as she heard the news, but by that time, police had already taped the house off as a potential crime scene. She told me that the man had just moved into the house with his partner. He made a phone call to his mum to ask her to come over to visit his new house, meet his partner for the first time, and come out to her. This was in the early 90s, when being gay was a big deal. His mother already had a fairly good idea that he was gay, because he'd bought a house with a man. His mother disowned him right over the phone during that call. That very same week, he received a letter from the sexual health clinic asking him to book an emergency appointment. It was during this appointment that he was given the news that he had contracted a potentially life-threatening sexually transmitted disease. At this time, such STDs were seen as a life sentence. That night, the man sat at the kitchen table in my house and shot himself in the head with a revolver. Since the man's death, she has had multiple paranormal experiences in that store. Such experiences include videos flying off the shelves or levitating in the air. Since moving in, I have also experienced sounds coming from downstairs at night. I've heard heavy footsteps going up and down the stairs, and what sounds like crying coming from the kitchen. However, the most disturbing sound I've heard is the sound of clicking or winding, followed by a really loud bang. I had no idea what these sounds were for a while, but after speaking to that store worker, it all makes sense now. I'm pretty sure what I'm hearing is the sound of a revolver being loaded and fired. I remember my grandmother saying to me, when the dead come to you, they're coming for a reason. Perform an act of charity in their name and pray for them. So, that's exactly what I did, and this is where the story gets spooky. One night, I sat down at the kitchen table and lit a candle. I started talking out loud. I told the man that each night I would recite a novena prayer for him and light a candle. On the 9th night of praying in front of that candle, I heard footsteps slowly creeping down the stairs. The footsteps sounded slow, heavy, and laboured. The hairs were standing up on the back of my neck as the kitchen door slowly opened by itself. There was a moment of silence, which was disturbed by the sound of uncontrollable sobbing, followed by what sounded like somebody hyperventilating and gasping for breath. I was absolutely petrified as I sat in that kitchen with the spirit of the man that once lived in my house. The presence felt entirely benevolent, and I instantly felt a connection of intimacy and compassion. For 45 days, I said a novena prayer and lit a candle to pray for his soul. I also arranged to have a mass held in his name. Since then, a few times I have awoken to feel his presence standing next to my bed, but this presence now feels very much at peace. It still happens from time to time, but less and less frequently. Please let me know if you have experienced anything like this. And that wraps things up for today. If you have any thoughts or suggestions on today's stories, please put them in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It would help the channel out massively. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.